Well, what is a business model? In this video, we're going to answer this question, and then we're going to also get into the 4 key components of every single business model. So to start, let's talk about what a business model is. A business model, very simply, describes the rationale for how a business or how a venture accomplishes 3 things. And those 3 things are creating, delivering, and capturing value. Now, many people often think of a business model as a way of answering the question how a business makes money. And in some ways, this is actually accurate, but it's a very simplistic description of what a business model is. While a business model does address how the business makes money, commonly referred to as a revenue model, it's really more all-encompassing than that. The revenue piece is really one aspect of it. When we talk about creating value, we're talking about solving problems. When we talk about delivering value, we're talking about really all of the activities that go into trying to deliver value to customers. So think about marketing and distribution, but also the infrastructure piece. And then capturing value, very simply, is all about selling a product at a price that people will pay, and then of course covering our cost. So those are the simple elements of a business model. Every business model addresses those 3 areas: how a business creates value, how it delivers value, and how it captures value. Now, going into the 4 areas, let's look at the 4 key areas of every single business model. And so these are areas that need to be addressed in every model in order for the business model to be somewhat successful, or at least have the potential for success. So let's start with the first area. The first thing that every business model has to address is what we call the offer. Now, the offer is one of the offer represents what we're actually selling to customers, and typically the offer addresses something very important, and that's what we call a value proposition. And this is a term that you've probably heard before in some capacity, and it's used a lot, especially in entrepreneurship and when talking about startups. A value proposition very simply answers the question, how are you different and why are you worth buying? And so it's very important that we, of course, offer products that solve real problems from consumers. And by real, I mean that we've undergone some type of testing process to make sure that the problems that consumers have aren't simply made up in our minds, but are actually real, and that most importantly, people will pay for an actual solution. So our offer gets into the product that we're creating, and then ultimately that product going to the consumer. And so trying to have this idea of product market fit, all of that is encompassed in the actual offer itself. Now, once we get to or through the offer piece, then the next piece is the customer. And the customer, of course, is the most important segment, simply because without the customer, there is no venture, there is no business. So the customer really is simply the, you could say, the target consumer for our product. So for the customer, it's really important that we have an accurate understanding of who this person is. And that's why we talk about doing things like customer discovery interviews and all sorts of things to try to get a finer depiction of the shared characteristics of our consumers. And so when describing a target market, right, we want to focus on identifiable characteristics, things like demographic variables, to try to identify those commonalities that the people that we think are going to best respond to our offer are going to have. And so we need to have our customer there. So the offer and the customer really go hand in hand, because this offer here is really created for a specific person in mind. So these are really done almost simultaneously. It's not like we think of an offer and then go out and try to find someone that it appeals to, right? That's kind of a backwards way. Instead, we're having an idea of who our customer is and creating things specifically for that particular demographic or that particular group of individuals. Now, moving on, so we've got offer, we've got the customer. The next piece that many people don't consider is what we call infrastructure. Now, infrastructure incorporates a lot of the things that really, when people are thinking about starting businesses, they're not necessarily thinking of, right? We're really good at thinking of the money piece and how we're going to actually gain money, what our revenue model might be, and we're really good at the offer and the product we want to create. But when it comes to the infrastructure, we often overlook this because this is kind of the nitty-gritty, if you will, of running a venture. And so with infrastructure, we're talking about resources. These are all of the things that we need to be able to create our offer and offer it to consumers or customers, our customer more specifically. So when you think about infrastructure, we're thinking about whether it's a certain type of skilled labor force, whether we need access to certain suppliers, whether we need certain key partners. What are the activities that are really important for us to do in order to be able to execute our offer and obviously sell to consumers? Those are all of the things that are folded into the infrastructure piece. And this is very much dependent upon the business. And so each of these things, the offer, will in turn have an impact on the infrastructure that's needed to accomplish our overall objective, whatever that may be. So if you're operating a subscription-based business, your infrastructure looks a little bit different, right? You're going to need some back-end support with regards to infrastructure. That becomes really important. Obviously, having some skill set with regards to coding could be really helpful. If your business model is kind of manufacturing, where it's very asset-based, or you're producing a good and selling it to someone else, your infrastructure needs are a little bit different, right? It's mostly efficiency, high access to capital up front. You need building and obviously people and machinery. And so all of these things are very much dependent upon what the business model is. So the last piece, now that we've gone through offer, customer, and infrastructure, is financial viability. And every business model needs to be financially viable. Otherwise, it simply won't work and it's not a successful model. And you need to have all four of these really to have a chance of being able to launch a successful venture. So with financial viability, we're finally going to introduce that revenue piece. So the two key components here are going to be the revenues for the business or the revenue model and also the costs. And ultimately, what we're trying to figure out at this stage is if the business has a chance of profitability and what that profitability looks like. What I would encourage students to do at this stage is to do what we call a break-even analysis, which is a somewhat involved type of analysis where we are costing the what our product is. So trying to identify what the product costs to make. We call that the economics of a unit. And so determining all of the variable costs, right? So direct materials, direct labor, other variable costs that go into creating a product or offering a service, determining the price per unit or the price that we think that the market will bear. And then of course, dividing the result of that by our fixed expenses, determining how much we need to sell in order to break even. It's a very, very simple kind of financial analysis that we can do, sort of back of the napkin math, if you will, that really can help us get a better idea for whether or not the venture has some viability, right? Ultimately, we need to know that we can charge a certain price. We need to know if that price can cover our costs here. And we need to know if we can sell enough to actually break even and cover our fixed costs, because if we can't do that within a reasonable time frame, well, then the business is going to be in trouble, and that could become very problematic. So whenever you're thinking about business models, again, just to kind of recap as we finish up, we're always thinking about how we're going to create value, right? Creating value being our offer to consumers. We're thinking about how we're going to deliver that value via infrastructure and all the things that we need to do to be able to get our product to consumers and be successful and replicate that at scale. And then lastly, the financial viability piece, which is, of course, can we capture the value for ourselves? So assuming we create it and we deliver it, is it going to be financially rewarding for us in the long run?